There we go.
Awesome. Thank you, Amber. All right. So the reason for this call is kind of as the email explained a little bit, is to discuss in some detail the new proposed ATF background check rule that the federal government has recently put out. We're in what is called the comment period. So I'll go into this a little bit later into the presentation, but with federal rules, usually what happens is the federal government will put forward a proposed regulation or rule and then allow the public 60 to 90 days to provide comments. So what we're doing today is going to walk through what this rule would do, why it's important, why it's necessary, and then help you all prepare comments to lobby in favor of this rule and kind of share your own thoughts and testimony. So my name is Nick Majewski. Sorry, I should have started with that, but I work with Wave, and I'm the Policy and Strategic Partnerships Manager, and that just means that I handle a lot of our policy at the state and federal level. And also talking with us today is going to be Heidi, who is our Communications Manager, and Jerry, who is our Executive Director. And Heidi and Jerry, if you'd like to unmute and introduce yourselves quickly.
Hi, as Nick said, I'm Heidi Johnson. I am the Communications and Public Relations Manager. I am so happy that you have decided to be here with us this evening, so thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Jerry, and I'm also very excited that you're here and looking forward to talking to you about this important rule change.
Thank you both. And then Amber, if you can go to the next slide, please. So a little bit about what this rule is trying to accomplish and why it's necessary. So this is a rule being proposed by the ATF, which is the federal government agency that is responsible for enforcing all gun laws. For the first time in over a decade, the Biden administration was able to get a nominee appointed to lead the agency. In the past 10 to 15 years, it's usually just been an acting director. But one of the many accomplishments of this administration has been to appoint a full-time Senate-confirmed director, Director Steve Dettelbach, and he has led the agency with a lot of effectiveness and has tried his best to implement different rules under the Biden administration's leadership that would do what we can with Congress as it is kind of reticent to act on these issues. So one of those proposed rules would be the rule that we're discussing today. It's called the Engaged in Business rule. And essentially, for decades, federal firearm license dealers have had to conduct background checks when they're selling guns to prospective buyers. But to be considered a federally licensed firearm dealer, you had to be engaged in the business of selling firearms. And that's been very loosely defined since, as the term's been in use for decades. And how it's typically been defined in the past is if it's your main means of making a living. If it's like your career, I am a firearm dealer, I've got a shop, this is what I'm going to do. You would fall under that criteria, and you'd have to run background checks when trying to sell firearms to an individual. If, however, you are selling at a gun show or an online store, or just selling guns on the back of your car, even if you're selling in large quantities, if it's not technically your main career, or if you're saying you're not really doing it for a profit, or whatever loophole you can think of, you can sell those firearms to individuals without running a background check. And oftentimes people do that because they know that they can sell it to individuals who otherwise wouldn't be able to pass a background check, which has led over the decades to, in no exaggeration, millions of people buying firearms that legally should not be allowed to do so. So what this rule is trying to do is to more narrowly define what it means to be engaged in the business, and kind of make it more clear that to be engaged in the business means anyone that is selling a firearm for profit. So it doesn't matter if you are a full-time seller or if you're somebody who is just getting rid of a few guns. If you're selling it for profit and trying to turn a profit, you are ostensibly engaged in the business and would have to conduct a background check. So this doesn't get us exactly to a universal background check, which is kind of a long-standing goal of the gun violence prevention movement, but it gets us pretty close. And it's really, really important that we engage with the ATF and make sure that they do in fact follow through with this rule. Amber, do you want to go to the next slide, please? So this is just talking a little bit about why this rule is necessary. I think most of us on this call are familiar with the issue and understand that a lot of firearms that are sold without background checks are in fact used in crimes and have been used by individuals who really have no right owning a firearm. And that can include somebody who has committed acts of domestic violence in the past or other violent acts and have a propensity to do so going forward. We know that 80% of firearms involved in criminal cases have been through sales that did not involve background checks, and that 96% of inmates convicted of gun offenses obtained their firearms illegally. And I believe that, stats show too that 22% of firearms sold, or rather 22% of the gun owners in this country have gotten their firearms through sales that did not require background checks. So it's a huge gap in our law that really, really does need to be rectified. And this will go a long way towards doing that. This would ensure that people selling at gun shows and selling online, and again, just selling out the back of their truck or whatever it might be, would have to, do a background check, which should only take a few minutes before they make those sales. And if they're not doing it, they can be held liable. Next slide, please. So this, as I mentioned earlier, is part of the federal rulemaking process. It's kind of a labyrinthine process that can go back and forth for several months. And it's important to know that the federal government cannot enact any rules that is not given the authority to do so by Congress. So Congress has to essentially give the federal government a means to create a rule. They legislate and say, here's what the general policy should be, and the federal government is responsible for enacting that policy. And by doing so, they kind of get to the nitty-gritty of what's that going to look like in practice. So the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was the large gun safety bill that was proposed and passed last summer, had a portion of the bill that would try to rectify the background check issue, and that's where this rule has kind of stemmed from. Every rule has a process that goes through. It's complex, but just for the sake of really kind of giving a brief overview, there's the pre-rule period, proposed rule period, and the final rule period. We are currently in the proposed rule period for this rule, which means that it's open for public comment. And there have already been hundreds of thousands, or at least over 100,000 comments provided on this rule. Some of them have been supportive of the rule, many have not been. Some of them have been, directly from the gun lobby, and that's what we're trying to counter here tonight, is having some rules and comments on the rule that would kind of oppose what those individuals have put forward. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry to talk a little bit more about why this is so necessary.
Great. Thank you so much for all of that information, Nick. And I just want to reinforce what Nick was saying and maybe bring a little bit of color to it, and in showing how important it is to address this unregulated part of the gun market. I have been, over the 30-some years I've been working on gun violence prevention, I have been to scores of gun shows all across the state of Wisconsin and all across the country. And I've also spent more hours than I should probably admit in the online gun marketplaces, all of that in an attempt to really understand how this unregulated part of the market functions. Given all of those experiences, I have a lot of stories, but I'm going to just stick to 3 observations tonight. First, the private sellers, these people who are not engaged in the business, sure act like they are. They oftentimes have just as many guns displayed at a gun show table or just as many listings in an online marketplace as do their licensed counterparts. In addition, they will also have things like business cards or business signage, the great big banners or carved wooden signs. So they sure look like they are engaged in the business. The second observation is that even though they might have these fancy signs and business cards, they make sure to, in some way or another, indicate to people that they are indeed private party sales, which in some ways is kind of coded language in the gun marketplace saying, hey, you don't need to have a background check here, or hey, you don't have to pay sales tax here. Sometimes they drop the nuance or the subtleties, and they'll just put up signs that say no sales tax on these guns or no background check required. One sign said no background check BS, or they'll say no paperwork required. Next slide, please. So I know it's hard to see this, but basically this is an online advertisement for a private party gun sale. And this private party has a picture up that shows a display case with lots of guns for sale, and they have tags indicating their price. And yet in the description, he says that he's selling this brand new gun, not something that he's just, ready to get rid of from his own collection, but a brand new gun. And the only reason he's selling it is because they just had a baby boy and they need the money. So kind of contrary to the picture where it sure looks like he has a lot of guns for sale, he's claiming it's for this other reason. But also in that description, he goes on to note that you're going to get a really good deal on this gun because you don't have to pay sales tax and you don't have to pay for a background check. My final observation on these private sellers is that with the exception of fully automatic weapons, these unlicensed, unregulated sellers are selling the same kind of guns as a licensed dealer. Next slide, please. So for example, these guns were at a gun show by a private seller, and that private seller is selling these AR-15 pistols, which are exactly the same frame as an AR-15 assault rifle, just in a smaller, more concealable package. This particular dealer is selling each of these guns with two 30-round magazines or with a 50-round drum magazine. Next slide. They can also sell guns like this, which is a 50 caliber sniper rifle. The manufacturer of this gun claims that this gun can take down a helicopter from a mile away. And remember, these guns are being sold by unlicensed sellers to anyone without a background check and with no questions asked. And it is the reason, this among many others, are the reasons that we know that we need to change the rule.
Thank you, Jerry. Those are some alarming things happening at gun sales and in other places. At this point, I have just put a comment in the chat. There's a link there to a Google Doc that I would invite everybody here to open. We wanted to create a resource for all of you that would help you have some ideas for what you could say in your comment to the ATF. There's going to be 3 parts to your comment in all likelihood: an introduction, your argument or arguments, and then your conclusion. So to go through briefly what you have here, we've offered you a couple of specific introductions that you could use. Obviously, you're free to use your own introduction if you prefer. Then we've broken down the possible types of arguments that you could use with different subheadings here, and I'll briefly run through those different options. As you craft your comment, you're of course welcome to use any one of these arguments, or you're welcome to use any combination of these arguments. You may copy and paste, or you may paraphrase as you see fit. The largest reason why we at Wave are doing this and are hoping this rule can be finalized and implemented is that, of course, background checks save lives. We have put just a few pieces of evidence, statistics in there that illustrate that point. If you go down a little bit more, it's probably not news to most of us here that background checks are incredibly popular. So we've put one specific poll in here that shows that 92% of Americans support background checks for all gun sales. Then below that, we've got some information you can put in about how many people are able to purchase a gun without a background check. Below that, we of course want to recognize that many people who are involved in these efforts are doing so because they have been personally impacted by gun violence. So if you have a story of your own personal impact or impact that you've seen, we would definitely invite you to share that if you would like to. That is definitely not something that you have to do, but some people feel compelled or interested in sharing how they've been personally touched, and you are more than welcome to do that. There's also a massive financial impact that gun violence has. That is not the primary reason why any of us are here tonight, of course, but we do know that financial information can sometimes motivate people who are not otherwise moved to act on certain situations. And then, of course, we've offered a couple of options for possible conclusions that you could give. You, of course, are able to include your own information that we have not included here. You also heard some information from both Nick and Jerry that you are more than welcome to put in there as well if you found those pieces of information compelling and meaningful. The next thing I'm going to put in the chat is the link to the actual portal. So this is where you will actually submit your comment. Now, depending on your personal preference, some of you may want to just write your comment directly into the comment portal. Some of you may prefer to type your comment elsewhere and then copy and paste it into the comment portal. Either way is perfectly fine. It just depends on your personal preference. Once you get to the portal, you can see here towards the upper left, there's a spot where it says start typing comment here. If you look at the other side of that line, you can see that there's a 5,000 character limit. 5,000 characters is relatively long. You could put almost all of the arguments that are in our Google Doc in your comment and have room for almost all of it. If you scroll down a little bit, there is an option for attaching files if you have any files that you would like to attach and submit. That is not a requirement, and it's not something that we are going to spend time on. I have already submitted my own comment to the ATF, and I did not attach any forms. Going down to the bottom there, you can see there's 3 options, so you can select who you are. Most of you are probably just submitting a comment on behalf of yourself, so you will select that you are an individual. And then you can see that you'll be prompted to fill out just a little bit of information, specifically your name, and then you're able to put a little bit more information if you would like. You'll then have to, of course, remind them that you're not a robot, and then you'll be able to submit your final comment. I would remind you to don't forget the step of actually submitting that comment. I know that after your brain has done all the work to get the comment right, it can sometimes be easy to miss that last final step. You'll have to scroll down just to the very, very bottom, and then there will be a button to submit your comment. That concludes the information that we really wanted to share with you today. So at this point, there are about 10 minutes left in our scheduled presentation. And so we would invite you to ask questions and also start crafting your comment right now if you would like. We will share these resources with you in an email after the meeting. You will receive the link to the comment portal. You'll receive a link to the presentation that you've heard us give, and you will receive a link to the Google Doc that has the menu of possible comments and arguments that you could use. So at this point, I'll just open it up to anybody who has questions. And if you don't have any questions, you are welcome to hop off and write your own comment on your timeline if you'd like, or you are welcome to start writing a comment right now.
And if there are no questions at the moment, we will be staying on the call for another 10 to 15 minutes if people would like. So if you want to work on it and then have a question as you go about doing that, we'll be here. So otherwise, good luck and thank you for joining.